If we're doing spring cleaning, what about the KonMari method? What about Marie Kondo? I'm Joseph. This is Input English. In previous videos, I talked about endeavors to get organized. In the last video, we talked about spring cleaning and what that means for many of us. And today I'd like to delve into a method that has been offered to us for tidying up our household. And that is the work of Marie Kondo. In brief, Marie is a 40-year-old lady in Japan who turned a childhood interest and fixation, if you will, into a career. She is an author, a lecturer, a consultant, and certainly she is an enthusiast. Her book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, became a bestseller, and her methods are commonly discussed in the realm of neatening up spaces. She has written 4 books so far, but it was her first one that launched her into worldwide fame. Now, I have a history with this book. We bought it years ago. Let me rephrase that. My wife bought it many years ago and read it. It was her intent to use the principles in this book to tidy up our space, tidy up our house. What happened? Nothing. And I think I was part of the problem because I was fairly resistant to radical change in the household. I had worked all my life to build a comfortable house, and it was not my intent to discard all of that stuff and take on a minimalist existence in this house. So part of the reason nothing happened was my lack of support for the concept. I probably just wasn't mature enough to understand what was at issue. So when I decided to put this video together, I went through the house to find our copy of Kondo's book, and I couldn't find it. Okay, well, does that mean we discarded it? Possibly, because we've had some purges over the years, things that we perceived we didn't need, so it may have been donated. That's possible. Or it could be here, and I just couldn't find it because of the clutter. I'm going to assume the latter and take that as evidence that I need to do something about the clutter in the house. So I have gotten a new copy of Kondo's first book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, and I have read so far only the first chapter, but I will continue on. That book is scheduled into my reading as part of my daily plan. So far, there are 2 striking statements in the book that I liked a lot. One is she suggests that we look at objects that we have collected in our house, and with respect to each of these objects, ask whether it sparks joy in us. Now that's a fairly high bar for keeping something. I think that high bar is how she convinces people to discard most of what they own. The other thing she advocates is putting one's house in order. The striking thing about that statement was that that is biblical. That came from Isaiah, and the meaning is very clear. Putting one's house in order, as we use that today, has to do with one's affairs, finances, legal matters, the way we are conducting our lives. So if we put our affairs in order, we put our house in order. So house means our life. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar by any means, but I recognized that reference when I read it in her book. She did not label it as biblical. The next thing I noticed with her book is that she advocates radical change. She is telling the reader to make a radical change in the household, do it once, and it's done. Her program is revolutionary. it upends everything. She argues that her aggressive one-time approach to cleaning the house and tidying it up makes it permanent. I'm not sure I buy that, because you have to factor in human nature, and old habits die hard. That's a phrase you will hear, old habits die hard. That phrase dates back to the 19th century and is used fairly commonly these days. It expresses the human resistance to change. Kondo's approach to a dramatic one-time cleaning is in stark contrast to a different Japanese concept called Kaizen. Kaizen is much talked about in the business world, and it refers to incremental change, small improvements on a daily basis yielding huge improvements over the long term. So as I looked at her recommendations, some of them made sense, but some of them didn't seem compatible with my sensibilities. And so that begs the question, in order for her approach to be useful to me, do I take it as a whole and do everything the way she has prescribed, or can I pick and choose? Now, in another video, I gave you a quote, take what you like and leave the rest. And I do that in life. When I see something interesting, I'm going to adopt things that are useful to me, but things that don't fit, I'm going to discard. I don't want to blindly follow somebody's recommendations without giving consideration to how it fits with my current circumstances. So for now, my plan is to pick and choose from her recommendations and not take it as an integrated package that must be accepted in toto. One of the big differences between her recommendations and the way I'm looking at things may have to do with the size of the living space, among other things. An apartment in Tokyo is less than 1/3 as big as a house in the United States. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but if you are trying to create a livable space that's very small in Tokyo, by definition, you don't have room for as many objects in that space. In the United States, houses are bigger than a Tokyo apartment by far, and so severe restrictions may not make sense given those differences. I had to question whether possibly cultural differences were at work here. Cultural attitudes vary around the world, and it is not likely that a citizen in Japan is going to look at everything exactly the way a citizen in the United States looks at things. We recognize and accept cultural differences, and this aggressive approach to tidying things up may have some cultural underpinnings. Now, to get into this next idea, we need to take a little bit of a detour, a little side trip, and explore the word dilettante. The word dilettante was derived from an Italian word, and it originally meant a lover of the arts. It was not a pejorative. It was actually a compliment that someone was familiar with and enamored with arts and music, for instance. In the 20th and 21st century, as used in the United States, if you refer to someone as a dilettante, most people construe that as derogatory, as negative. I learned that word to refer to the idle rich, someone who dabbles, someone who does a lot of things but is not very good at anything, an amateur. So if you use that term dilettante in common speech, people will understand that you are registering a criticism of the person labeled dilettante. Now, I would like that to change. I'm not in a position to change common usage of words, but I think that's a terrible disservice. I would consider it a very sad situation if each person had to have their one career, be very good at it, function as an automaton in that area of expertise, and do nothing else. I would find such a person very shallow and boring. Tom Vanderbilt wrote a book, The Joy and Transformative Power of Lifelong Learning. And in his book, he advocated that we all become dilettantes. He points out that Nobel Prize laureates are 25 times more likely to be amateur musicians, amateur actors, dancers, magicians, and participants in other types of performance. Now, I've not read his book. It sounds interesting, but there are a lot of books to read, and it's not on my short list by any means. It was nice to see that he was advocating an approach that is very familiar to me, and that is have wide and varied interests and try to learn something new every day. So the reason I went off on this side trip regarding the meaning of dilettante and what it means to be a dilettante is if we have wide and varied interests, then we are on a collision course with Marie Kondo's approach to strip the house of all the possessions. When we take on new activities, we learn new skills, and we may acquire the supplies and equipment necessary to participate in that new discipline as a beginner. So you may have noticed on the end of the mantle, there's no lamp, there's no candle, there's no clock. That's a bowl. That bowl is made of redwood, California coastal redwood, and I very much knew the man who made that. That bowl was made by Jerry Kermode. Jerry made bowls, sold bowls, and taught people wood turning. And the way I got to know him was one of my many surprises from my wife. More than a decade ago, she announced to me that she and I were going to take a class. Naturally, I was curious what sort of class she had signed us up for. She had already made the reservations and had put it on the calendar. The class was paid for. But what sort of class is this going to be? She took us to the Napa Valley in California, north of here, to the town of Sebastopol, to the studio of Jerry Kermode, and we learned how to make bowls. We were rank beginners. We knew nothing. He introduced us to his shop. He had equipment for us to use. He taught us how to sharpen the gouges. He focused on safety. He had a lot of material for us to work on, a lot of different kinds of wood, and we made a bunch of things. It was a 2-day class, as I recall. Now, I'm not displaying a bowl I made. It was nice enough, but I'm showing you the Jerry Kermode bowl because it's a cherished possession. He made beautiful bowls. In that class, I was a beginner, I was learning new things, and we acquired some equipment and some supplies so that I can make bowls now and in the future. So as I embrace the ideas of Marie Kondo, it would never occur to me to look harshly at my wood turning lathe and proclaim that it brings me no joy, sparks no joy in my life, and discard it. No, it's staying. So as I analyze her recommendations that are developing before my eyes as I read her book, and then compare those against my situation here in this house with wide and varied interests, I recognize that we are on a collision course. It will take some thought to figure out how I can resolve the conflict between what she is telling me and what I want. I suspect, using the concept of take what you want and leave the rest, I will wind up with a substantial net benefit of a much neater, tidier house. Things will be much better organized, but it is not going to be an incredibly spare, ultra simplified household that I would find uninteresting. Going forward, her book is on my reading list. I read a little bit every day. I learned during the pandemic that it is perfectly acceptable and reasonable to read more than one book at a time. The human brain is very capable of keeping track of different books. And so it is common for me to have 2 or 3 books active at any time with bookmarks in them. To that, I add books that are audiobooks that I'm playing predominantly when I'm driving. Usually if I'm in the house, I'm not listening to an audiobook. I do not read books while I'm doing something that requires my attention. I learned that doesn't work, and it also doesn't work for comprehensible input. If I am preparing my tax returns or paying bills, that's not a good time for me to listen to an audiobook or get input in Spanish. If I'm washing the dishes, no problem. Any mindless, repetitive task that requires no conscious management of what's going on is a great time to listen to content. So I will finish the Kondo book. I will do a synthesis of how that fits. I suspect that I will go forward with more of a Kaizen approach of incremental improvement, but there are clearly some great takeaway concepts in this lady's book. I will finish her book, and then I will take what I wish and leave the rest. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.